Hi, I am Dimitris Mavrokephalides. Welcome to this Big Zero Show 100 Days of Labor podcast. Today we will be discussing major policy. I am thrilled to be joined by Marcus Shepheard, Policy Manager at Nesta, an innovation foundation known for pushing forward the boundaries of policy and technology for social good. Marcus, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Today we're going to talk more about major policy. We're going to discuss about the journey towards net zero, the major policies shaping the energy landscape. And Marcus, to kick things off, let's talk about the government's role in pushing the market towards decarbonization. And what's your first thoughts on these first 100 days of the new government?
I think it's been very positive. It's not that we've seen zero progress over the course of the previous government, but there's definitely been an acceleration, an increase in both the ambition and action. So, I'm sure we're going to get into this, but things like lifting the ban on onshore wind planning for onshore wind projects, establishing GB Energy, we're seeing the National Energy Systems Operator come into a fore, and the establishment of mission control to coordinate all that really shows a new level of commitment and purpose to deliver the Clean Power Plan and make real progress on clean energy generation in the UK.
As you said, these 100 days were full of major policy announcements. We have seen several major policy announcements over the past few months. From your perspective, which will be the most impactful policies that will shape the decarbonization agenda?
That is a very good question. Which is the best? I mean, it is in a way a complete package. All the bits work together. I think the one that was probably the most welcome was lifting the ban on onshore wind. That was something that was such a no-brainer and had been, sitting there for years, and it was such an easy decision for them to take. So I think that will be very impactful because while we will be doing a lot of offshore wind, onshore wind is also a massive resource for the UK and one that we have just not really even attempted to exploit. But I think in the long run, GB Energy is going to be the really interesting one because I think that has potential to be a real step change in the the affordability and scale of these major capital projects for power generation. So interested to see how that goes. But I think offshore wind was the no-brainer, but GB Energy is probably going to be the big one in the long run.
Obviously, achieving net zero grid by 2030 is a massive challenge. One of the biggest issues we face right now, it is something that, the energy industry is discussing a lot the last couple of months, is the demand for electricity, especially as we electrify more sectors like transport and heating. There's an estimated investment need of between 350 billion and 500 billion to meet that demand. What are the key challenges that could prevent us from reaching this goal?
So I think there's several things that could prevent us. I would say the first is the prosaic, planning, things just being slower and harder than we'd like. There is going to be understandably opposition to things like building pylons to bring power in from offshore wind. There's going to be opposition to new power projects. It's going to involve digging up roads and building new substations. So that the grit in the mill could be one of the things. I think there's also other challenges. So one of the things we really squandered was, we've had years of very cheap borrowing, which we didn't really use to any great extent to fund these things. Now we're in an environment where borrowing is more expensive and the cost of capital massively affects, what these projects cost and how deliverable they are. So I think that is also going to be a break, and that is also going to, potentially pass much more significant costs on to consumers in the long run. And I think the other general issue is just a potential lack of coordination. Like you're not trying to do a series of small projects here, there, and everywhere. You're trying to do a big nationwide change program that starts with the power sector, the power generation sector, but then also involves a massive build out of EV charging infrastructure, a complete transformation of the way we heat buildings, particularly our homes, and also other things, industrial transformation like that. And I think the real challenge for government is, it can hand over some of these other things, the actual building, the actual financing of projects to the private sector to an extent, and to a large extent, but the coordination piece has to come from government. And I think that's going to be the hard thing to sustain over time. But, again, some of the policy announcements we've seen are really pointing in the good direction for that. So I think we have reasons to be confident that they can do it.
Of course, the rising costs of energy is a major concern for many, many people, businesses, consumers. How do you see these rising costs and ongoing supply chain constraints affecting the progress towards net zero?
So I think if I can just split that into two and do the cost and then the supply chain, the rising cost of energy is a massive problem. It's the UK's dependence on gas is absolutely, it's just killing us. It was the biggest driver of the inflationary shock over the last couple of years. If we just look at how people, the main use of gas is to heat our homes, and consumers spent an extra, well, the amount they spend on gas doubled to what was it? I think it was about 24 billion pounds last year just to heat their homes, and the government spent another like 30 billion protecting people from high prices. But this trickles through as well because gas sets the electricity price 97% of the time. And the previous government did make a good effort to try and reduce energy prices through its review of energy market arrangements, but the conclusion has been that REMA just wasn't going to work, and there just isn't a straightforward way to decouple the gas electricity prices in the near term as people had hoped. So I think the solution is going to be that we just have to build our way out of this. We can decouple electricity from gas if we're just producing so much cheap renewable electricity that we never really need to turn to gas generation. And that is the goal of the Clean Power Plan. And but that won't come through till obviously 2030. And in the near term, we're stuck. I think, the government should be doing more to intervene. It could be taking action to reduce, both the consumer cost of electricity, for example, by taking action on, say, the policy costs. So, there are levies on gas and electricity bills. Those could be rebalanced. That would deliver some short-term benefits. But ultimately, the only way we're going to do it is by just having a lot more renewable generation and the infrastructure to deliver that to home. So I think that's on the cost side. We're not a producer of gas anymore. We just have to start thinking of ourselves as a wind superpower, not a gas producing nation. The second question.
The supply chain constraint, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one. So I'm always fascinated by the bottlenecks in it. So one, I remember Emma Pinchbeck bringing this up a while ago. If you want to install the biggest offshore wind turbines, there's only, I think, 2 or 3 ships in the world that can do the absolute biggest ones, and we're really trying to do the big ones now. And it's not just the UK. The UK got a huge lead start on offshore wind, but other countries are now getting in there. So we're competing with other countries, and simple constraints like can you access this ship can really, really start things up. But then there's other things too, we don't have enough people to do a lot of the manual labor we need, whether it's retrofitting homes or building pylons. There was a very interesting question when GB Energy was the idea of GB Energy being developed was should it have a procurement function? Should the government be buying, say, high voltage DC cables in bulk to sort of smooth out some of these gaps in the supply chain? And I think the general view has been that that's not the most effective way to use GB Energy, but it is going to be a challenge. And I think this is one of those things where the mission-based approach really helps, because the idea of a mission is that it's not just a conventional form of policymaking, it's a way for government to crowd in lots of different parts of government and sort of share both responsibility and accomplishment for a problem. So things like the Clean Power Plan would not really be an issue on, say, the Department for Education's radar, but obviously they hold a lot of responsibility for skills policy, which is maybe where you get the people you need to do a lot of the work. A mission-based approach makes it easier to sort of crowd those people in, to bring in DFE, to bring in, DEFRA on the environmental regulation side, to bring in Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Governance on the planning side. So I think, some of those supply chain constraints that are within the government's gift can be addressed through the mission-based approach. Other things, I think, is just going to have to sort of work its way through. I think it's a matter of the government sending a very strong signal and using that to lead markets, so that the companies downstream in the supply chain can invest with confidence or can take decisions with confidence, knowing that there's going to be demand for the services or the goods they provide over the next sort of decade or so.
Now, let's focus on some key policy decisions of this new government. Grid connections, onshore wind development, Ofgem reforms and the creation of Great British Energy. Obviously, there's a lot happening. Let's break this down. Grid connections have been a bottleneck for many renewable projects. We have been hearing from the energy industry, energy companies have to wait for around 15 years to just secure a grid connection. How critical is this issue, the issue of grid connections for renewable energy, and these 2030 target that the government has set?
The sort of the upstream end, so actually bringing the power onshore, and then also at the downstream end, sort of making sure that individual sort of buildings and sites can connect. I think this is one that's going to take a little while to work through the system, but there's definitely enough to do that. I don't think there's been a single decision yet that sort of will transform that. So I think that's one which we're looking at. One thing I have sort of paid a lot of attention to, and I think is good, is that Ofgem is clearly thinking about a lot of this in its future price control frameworks for both the sort of electricity distribution and transmission systems, noting that the current system of sort of anticipatory connection and planning is sorry, the current system, which is reactive, is not very good. They want to have a more plan, more anticipating, more of a pipeline of connection requests coming through. So I think that's one for me is in a bit of a wait and see category, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Marcus, you mentioned Ofgem's role in this decarbonization process. And obviously, quite recently, there's been a lot of discussion about Ofgem's role in regulating the energy market. What kind of reforms do you think are necessary to make Ofgem more agile and responsive to the needs of the net zero agenda and transition?
It's a really good question. I don't have a simple answer to that. Ofgem is quite a large beast and it's doing quite a lot, and it's probably going to have to take on a lot more. I think one of the things that will help it is the emergence of the National Energy Systems Operator, which is taking on some of those functions, such as the strategic sort of spatial planning role, will take some of the load off Ofgem. In other ways, I think the existing arrangements it has for the price control frameworks are not perfect, but they work. And I wouldn't be rushing to tinker with that. I think you would want to provide the stability and certainty that needs. I think the main thing we're looking at Ofgem is, well, there's two things. One is continuity and sort of helping it clear out some of perhaps sort of like the legacy schemes that, can allow it to focus on the future a bit more. But I think the other thing is also thinking about whether it has a role in heat more in the future. So it currently is predominantly a regulator of gas and electricity, but heat is also going to be this thing which is going to be a real interesting and big part of the energy system. So I think there is a lot of business as usual that needs to be sort of like sustained to maintain to reduce uncertainty. But otherwise, I think Ofgem is going to have to evolve. Again, that's going to be probably more of like a 4 or 5 year process.
One of the biggest, dilemmas that the energy industry is facing right now is, on the one side, of course, obviously, everyone can admit the need for bringing new renewable energy projects into the grid. But the other side says that probably it's so difficult to secure approval from communities for all these new energy infrastructure. What's your take on this, Marcus?
It's definitely a real challenge. I think the government as a whole has sent out quite strong signals. I think we saw this in Keir Starmer's speech at the Labour Party conference. This is and Rachel Reeves too, this is a government that plans to build, and they know that will involve making some difficult decisions, some unpopular decisions to put stuff in certain places. I think, though, this is one area also where GB Energy can really help. So GB Energy has sort of 4 nominal functions, but one of them is as a sort of a developer or pre-developer. So I think, using sort of the enhanced sort of planning that we're going to be getting through the sort of the new arrangements with Mission Control and the National Energy Systems Operator, GB Energy can get ahead of some of these issues. So rather than energy companies sort of bidding for projects and then having to seek planning rights and development and deal with all of sort of like the local relationships, GB Energy will be getting ahead of that and will be sort of, trying to get a lot of those projects sort of locked in and ready to go, so that then, the private sector just needs to come in with the capabilities and the investment to be like, yes, we're going to make this happen. But I wouldn't want to downplay how, difficult and contentious this is going to be. I mean, I think, the classic one we've seen already is the Green Party leader who's been very, very opposed, understandably, as a constituency MP, to pylons in his constituency. But if we want to get to net zero, pylons are going to have to be built. And so it's a political challenge. But I think as much as policy can solve this, things like GB energy and stuff will, I think, potentially go a lot of the way to help with that.
Nesta has been vocal about the need for stronger state intervention and better coordination to accelerate the net zero transition. What are some of the key recommendations Nesta has for enhancing the government's role in the energy sector?
So I think we're actually quite pleased. I mean, a lot of our recommendations that we've had have been, I think, broadly taken forward. So mission-driven government is a big part of it. So the establishment of mission control led by Chris Stark is absolutely in line with our recommendations. It takes an issue out of a departmental silo and spreads it around government to solve it. So that's one thing. GB energy is another thing. I think looking forward, some of the things we're looking for are more downstream of the power sector. I think there will be some stuff, but one that sits within the power sector, I think, is the question around hydrogen. So we can't get to net zero without hydrogen, but Nesta has a very firm view that hydrogen is just not going to be an effective solution for home heating. But until the government takes its strategic decision and provides some clarity around how much hydrogen will be in the future energy system, it is going to be difficult for the firms involved to know exactly what the upper bound of electricity generation or grid capacity they need to provide is. So I think that would be one thing.
Just a quick question, Marcus. Do you feel that hydrogen should have an integral role to play in this 2030 target? Is it feasible for hydrogen right now, just to put it in this current energy landscape?
Not in the current energy landscape, but I struggle to see how you do the 2030 Clean Power Plan with no hydrogen. There will be periods of low wind and stuff like that, or periods of intense, demand. Having dispatchable power generation, is going to be essential now. The goal of the 2030 Clean Power Plan is to be clean, so that means no dispatchable gas. So hydrogen is going to be the alternative. Now, the scale and extent of that remains a little bit to be seen, but I think absolutely we need to be getting on identifying sites for hydrogen storage, salt caverns, thinking about what we need to do in terms of building, a transmission network that links up those storage sites with the industrial clusters in places like the Humber, with, offshore power generation, electrolyzers, such like that. So I think that is very much a question that needs to be resolved, but it's very hard. You can plan for a minimal amount of that, but actually when you're thinking about things like the transmission infrastructure, the scale of what might be needed to heat homes, assuming that was still a consideration, which until the government takes a decision it is, massively affects the scale of that. So you can't plan well for it until that decision is taken. So yes, we do need hydrogen. We do need to get on with that and get some of that into the planning now for 2030. But the government can massively reduce the scope of uncertainty around that by ruling home heating in or out, and we would recommend out. We just don't think it's a good solution for home heating.
My last question for you, Marcus, is overall about the 2030 target of the government's target. I heard a few days ago the chief of electricity system operators saying that is a massive challenge, but it is possible. What's your thoughts on that?
He's absolutely nailed it. I think the phrase we would use is it's very hard but doable, and I think that's an exciting thing. I think one of the things we seem to have lost slightly in the UK in recent years is a sense of self-belief that we can do hard things. I think you look at say like the HS2 project, which got cancelled, curtailed. There are very good reasons, and there's lots of discussion around why it is so hard and so expensive to build stuff in this country. And we should absolutely address those issues, around planning, the cost of energy, stuff like that. But that shouldn't deter us from trying to do hard things. The 2030 Clean Power Plan is hard, but the benefits, both at the end and in the doing, are so worth it. So yeah, it's going to need a lot of support. It's going to need more work. There's going to be a lot to do with mission control, GB Energy, NESO, Ofgem, all the others over the years. There's going to be questions around heat, around transport. But it's putting us in the right direction. It's the right level of ambition. It's a good thing to be doing. And, it's end of the day, it's something we will be proud of if we achieve it. And I hope we will. I believe we can. It'll be something we'll be proud of.
Let's hope for the better then. Marcus, thank you very much for joining us. It was really pleasure talking to you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Demetrius. It's been lovely.
Thank you. For those of you following our week-long online conference, stay tuned to futurenetzero.com and energylivenews.com for live updates and more exciting speakers coming. Tomorrow, Tuesday, 15th October, we'll be discussing energy costs and finance. For more details on the next sessions of the 100 Days of Labor online conference, keep an eye on our updates on futurenetzero.com.